The glass of amber liquid sat on the polished mahogany, a single perfect cube of ice slowly dissolving within it. From across the room, at a gala meant to celebrate a legitimate enterprise he despised, Jin Ko watched the nurse. Her name was Clara, and she was talking to his father. His father, the architect of their family's dark legacy, was smiling. A predator's smile. He held out the glass to her, a gesture of hospitality that was anything but. Jin's blood went cold. He saw the subtle shift in his father's posture, the way his eyes glinted with something ancient and cruel. He knew that drink. He knew the tasteless, odorless powder that would be mixed within it. A little something to loosen the tongue, to cloud the judgment, to make a woman pliable to the questions of a man who collected secrets like other men collected art. He started moving. The space between them felt like a mile of thick, suffocating tar. People turned, their polite chatter faltering as he cut a path through the glittering crowd, his face a mask of stone. He was too far. He would never make it in time. But then, something extraordinary happened. Clara, who had been listening with a polite but weary expression, leaned in close to his father. Her voice was a bare whisper, a ghost of a sound, but in the sudden sharp focus of his terror, Jin heard every syllable as if she had shouted it in his ear. "Don't drink that." It wasn't to his father she spoke. Her eyes were fixed on the glass, her head angled just so, and the whisper was directed at herself. A mantra of self-preservation. A lifeline in a sea of sharks. She took a half-step back, her smile tightening into a polite, impenetrable shield. "Thank you, Mr. Ko, but I really should be getting back to my duties." Jin stopped dead. The air rushed back into his lungs. He watched as she navigated away from his father, her back straight, her stride unwavering. She hadn't seen him. She had no idea he was even there. She had saved herself. And in that moment, watching the resilient heart of a woman he was not worthy to know, Jin Ko, head of the city's most feared Korean syndicate, understood he was utterly, irrevocably lost. 3 months earlier, the city was just the city, and Jin Ko was just a name Clara heard in hushed tones from other nurses, the name of the family that had endowed the entire cardiac wing of St. Jude's General, a name associated with impossible wealth and a faint, unspoken scent of danger. For Clara Washington, however, the name meant little. Her world was a 12-hour shift, the acrid smell of antiseptic, the constant bone-deep exhaustion of holding lives in her hands, and the ever-present stack of bills on her small kitchen table. Her life was a rhythm of beeps from monitors and the squeak of worn-out sneakers on linoleum floors. It was the weight of her mother's medical debt, a crushing inheritance that tethered her to double shifts and cheap instant noodles. She shared a cramped apartment with her best friend, Maya, another nurse who understood the language of fatigue and the gallows humor required to survive their profession. "Another masterpiece," Maya said one evening, peering into the pot of watery chili Clara was stirring. Clara managed a weak smile. "It has protein-adjacent substances in it." "My favorite kind." Maya leaned against the counter, her expression softening. "You can't keep this up, Clara. You're going to burn out." "The bills don't care if I'm burned out." She scraped the chili into 2 bowls. "They just want to get paid." It was her reality, a stark, unyielding truth. She was resilient because she had no other choice. She was principled because it was the only thing she truly owned. Her independence was a fortress built brick by painful brick, and she guarded it with a fierce, quiet pride. She didn't have time for dreams, only for the relentless grind of survival. Across the city, in a penthouse that floated above the grime and the struggle, Jin Ko felt a different kind of exhaustion. It was the weariness of a king on a throne he never asked for. His father had built the Ko Empire on a foundation of shadow and fear, a complex web of legitimate businesses, shipping, construction, hospitality, that laundered the profits from the illegitimate ones. When his father had stepped back, citing a desire to enjoy his twilight years, the crown had passed to Jin. It was a heavy crown. He stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, the city lights a galaxy of scattered diamonds below. He was impeccably dressed, as always. A custom-tailored suit that felt more like a uniform, a cage of fine wool and silk. His face, which women often called devastatingly handsome, felt like a mask. Only the faint silvery scar that cut through his left eyebrow hinted at the violence that was never far from the surface of his life. "The Tong have made their move on the docks, Hyung Nim," a voice said from behind him. Jin didn't turn. He just watched the endless stream of headlights on the freeway. "Min Jun," he said, his voice low and even. "What did they take?" Min Jun, his second in command and the closest thing he had to a friend, stepped into his line of sight. "2 containers. Electronics." "And what was under the electronics?" Jin's tone was flat, devoid of emotion. Min Jun's jaw tightened. "The shipment from Macau." Jin finally turned, his dark eyes locking onto his friend's. "Then they have not taken electronics. They have declared war." He felt nothing. No anger, no fear. Just a profound, hollow emptiness. This was his life. A series of moves and countermoves on a bloody chessboard. He was wealthy, he was powerful, and he was profoundly, achingly lonely. His world was one of duty and darkness, and he was beginning to fear there was no way out. The next day, that world collided with Clara's. It was a stupid accident. One of his younger, more reckless men had gotten into a bar fight, a territorial dispute that ended with a broken bottle and a deep gash in the man's arm. Protocol dictated they use their own private doctor, a man well paid for his discretion. But the kid was losing too much blood, and the doctor was across town. Min Jun made the call. "St. Jude's, General." Jin arrived minutes later, his presence immediately shifting the atmosphere of the emergency room. The air crackled. Nurses stopped mid-stride. Doctors looked up from their charts. He radiated an aura of power that was as palpable as a physical force. He ignored them all, his focus solely on finding Min Jun. He found him standing outside a curtained-off cubicle. "He's stable," Min Jun reported. "They're stitching him up." Jin nodded, his gaze sweeping the chaotic ER. And then he saw her. She was leaning over a patient, an elderly woman with fear in her eyes. The nurse, Clara, had her back to him, but he could see the gentle way she moved, the focused calm in her posture. She was adjusting the woman's IV drip, her voice a low, soothing murmur that cut through the surrounding noise. "It's okay, Mrs. Gable," she was saying. "Just a little pinch. I've got you." Then she turned, a small, genuine smile on her face for the old woman, and Jin's world tilted on its axis. It wasn't that she was beautiful in the conventional, polished way of the women in his circle. Her beauty was something rawer, more authentic. It was in the stray curl that had escaped her tight bun, the faint sheen of perspiration on her brow, the exhaustion that clung to her like a second skin, but couldn't dim the light in her eyes. He saw her strength. He saw her kindness. He saw the person she was, clear and true, in a world where he was surrounded by masks. The moment froze. The cacophony of the ER faded into a distant hum. It was just her. A fixed point in his spinning universe. He felt a jolt, a shock of recognition so profound it was almost painful. It was a feeling he had never known, a sudden, overwhelming certainty that he had been searching for her his entire life without even knowing it. "Hyung Nim?" Min Jun's voice broke the spell. "Are you all right?" Jin couldn't tear his eyes away. "Who is she?" The question was quiet, almost a whisper. Min Jun followed his gaze. "A nurse, I suppose." "I know she's a nurse," Jin said, his voice tight. "What is her name?" Clara, oblivious to the silent, intense scrutiny, finished with her patient and moved toward the nurse's station, her focus already on the next chart, the next life. For Jin, everything had changed. For Clara, it was just another Tuesday. The pursuit began subtly. An anonymous donation was made to the Hospital Benevolent Fund, specifically earmarked to clear the outstanding debts of select nursing staff. Clara received a letter 1 week later informing her that her mother's remaining medical bills, the mountain that had dictated every choice she'd made for the last 3 years, had been paid in full. By an anonymous benefactor. She stared at the letter, her hands trembling. It had to be a mistake, a cruel joke. She called the billing department, her heart hammering against her ribs. It wasn't a mistake. The balance was 0. She sat on her bed, the letter clutched in her hand, and cried. Tears of shock, of disbelief, and finally, of overwhelming, suffocating relief. It felt like a miracle. A weight she had carried for so long it had become part of her was suddenly gone. "Who would do this?" Maya asked, equally stunned. "Do you have a secret billionaire admirer?" Clara laughed through her tears. "If I did, I'd at least expect dinner first." The thought was so absurd it was comical. Her life was not a fairy tale. But the strange, silent gifts continued. The flickering streetlight at the end of her block, the one that always made her walk home from the late shift a little faster, was suddenly repaired. A new, high-end coffee machine appeared in the nurse's break room, along with a perpetually stocked supply of expensive gourmet beans. Small things, anonymous things, but they began to add up. Jin watched from a distance, orchestrating it all through Min Jun. He learned her schedule, her favorite coffee order, the name of her cat. He knew it was an invasion of creepy. He knew it was an invasion of privacy. But he couldn't stop. The obsession was a fire in his blood, a stark contrast to the icy control he maintained over every other aspect of his life. He was a man who took what he wanted, but with her, he found himself wanting to give. He wanted to ease her burdens, to smooth the rough edges of her world. He waited for 2 weeks before making his move. He knew from Min Jun that her old, unreliable car was in the shop again, and she was taking the bus. He chose his moment carefully. Clara stood at the bus stop, shivering in the crisp autumn air. The bus was late, of course it was. She was exhausted, her feet ached, and all she wanted was to be home. A sleek black car, the kind of car that cost more than her apartment building, glided to a stop in front of her. The tinted rear window slid down with a silent hum. Inside sat the most devastatingly handsome man she had ever seen. He was wearing a dark suit that looked like it was made for him and no one else. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his eyes were intense, pinning her in place. "You look cold," he said. His voice was a low, smooth baritone that sent an unexpected shiver down her spine, and it had nothing to do with the temperature. "Can I offer you a ride?" Clara's internal alarms, honed by years of navigating the city alone, screamed. Men in expensive cars did not offer rides to nurses at bus stops for noble reasons. "I'm good," she said, her tone flat and unimpressed. "I like the bus, all the interesting smells." A corner of his mouth ticked upward, a ghost of a smile. "My car has that new car smell. It's also interesting. I'll bet." She looked pointedly at the approaching bus. "And there's my ride now. Thanks anyway." She expected him to drive off, annoyed or insulted. He didn't. He just watched her. As she climbed the steps of the bus, she risked a glance back. He was still there, his dark eyes following her, an unreadable expression on his face. The feeling of his gaze on her back was unnerving, a strange mix of creepy and captivating. He was there the next day, and the day after that. The same black car, the same offer. "No," she'd say. "Are you sure?" he'd ask. "Positive." On the 4th day, it was pouring rain, a miserable sideways torrent that soaked her through her thin jacket in seconds. The bus shelter offered little protection. The black car pulled up. The window came down. "This is getting ridiculous," he said. His tone wasn't mocking. It was a simple statement of fact. She looked at her soaked scrubs, at the puddle forming around her feet, and then at him, dry and warm in his luxurious car. She sighed. "This is creepy. You know that, right?" "I am aware," he said, his expression serious. "My name is Jin Ko. I will drive you home. I will not try to murder you. I will not even speak to you if you don't wish it." Clara hesitated. Jin Ko. the name clicked into place. The hospital wing, the rumors. This wasn't just a rich guy. This was that rich guy. "Is what you're doing even legal?" she asked, a sarcastic retort born of disbelief. Probably not," he admitted without a hint of shame. "Please, get in the car, Clara." He knew her name. Of course, he knew her name. A shiver of fear warred with a spark of something else, something dangerously like curiosity. Against her better judgment, she opened the door and slid inside. The leather was soft, the air was warm, and it smelled of him. A clean, expensive scent that was both intimidating and intoxicating. The ride was silent, just as he'd promised. He didn't ask for her address. He just drove, navigating the city streets with an unnerving confidence until he pulled up directly in front of her building. "How did you know where I live?" she asked, her voice quiet. He finally turned his head to look at her fully. The intensity in his gaze was like a physical blow. "I have made it my business to know," he said. "I apologize if it frightens you. That is not my intention." "What is your intention, Mr. Coe?" she asked, her chin lifting in defiance. "My intention," he said, his voice dropping, "is to have dinner with you. I don't go on dates with strange men who stalk me." "Then I will have to become less of a stranger," he countered. "Tomorrow. I will pick you up at 7. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a declaration. "I'll be busy," she said, a last-ditch effort to maintain control. "No, you won't," he said softly. "Tomorrow." He was right. She had the night off, a rare occurrence she had been looking forward to for weeks. As she got out of the car, she felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Her carefully constructed fortress was being besieged by a man who moved with the certainty of a force of nature. And the most terrifying part was, a small, treacherous part of her wanted to let him in. The next night, at 7 o'clock sharp, he was there. Not in the imposing black car, but standing on her doorstep, holding a single, perfect white orchid. He was dressed in dark jeans and a cashmere sweater, a deliberate attempt to appear less intimidating. It didn't work. The power clung to him, an invisible mantle. Clara opened the door, armed with a sarcastic refusal, but the words died on her lips. Seeing him there, looking so impossibly handsome and unexpectedly nervous, disarmed her. "I can't afford whatever restaurant you're planning to take me to," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "We're not going to a restaurant," he said, handing her the orchid. He gestured to 2 large bags at his feet. "I brought dinner. I was hoping you would let me cook for you." Clara stared at him, then at the grocery bags, and then back at him. It was the last thing she had expected. "You cook?" "I have a few hidden talents," he said, that ghost of a smile playing on his lips again. She should have said no. She should have slammed the door in his face and bolted it twice. But she heard herself say, "You'll have to cook around the cat. He's a harsh critic." He cooked in her tiny kitchen with an efficiency and grace that was mesmerizing. He made a complex Korean dish, filling her small apartment with aromas she had never smelled before. He didn't seem to notice the peeling paint or the mismatched furniture. He just focused on the task, on her, asking questions about her day, about her work, listening with an attentiveness that made her feel like the only person in the world. They ate sitting on her worn-out sofa. The food was incredible. For the first time, Clara felt her defenses begin to crumble. This man was a puzzle. The formidable, intimidating presence was still there, but underneath it, she glimpsed someone else. Someone lonely. Someone who looked at her not as a conquest, but as a lifeline. "Why me?" she asked, the question that had been burning in her mind for days. "You could have any woman you want." Jin put down his chopsticks and looked at her. The playfulness was gone, replaced by a raw, startling vulnerability. "That's the point," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't want any woman. I want you." The words hit her like a punch to the chest. They were simple, direct, and held the weight of an undeniable truth. It was a confession, not a line. In that moment, she knew she was in trouble. Deep trouble. Their relationship developed in a strange, secret bubble. He would appear at her apartment late at night, after his own dark duties were done. He never spoke of his work, and she learned not to ask. He called it family business, and the phrase was always delivered with a flat finality that discouraged further inquiry. He showed her a world she never knew existed: rooftop gardens overlooking the glittering city, private screenings of films not yet released, quiet walks along a deserted stretch of beach at a private estate. He showered her with luxury, but it was the small things that truly captured her heart. The way he would trace the lines on her palm when he thought she was sleeping. The way he listened, truly listened, to her stories about the hospital. The way his eyes, so often cold and hard to the rest of the world, would soften and warm whenever he looked at her. He was gentle. He was attentive. He was possessive in a way that should have terrified her, but instead made her feel cherished, protected. For the first time in her life, Clara felt safe. It was an illusion, she knew, a dangerous, beautiful illusion. Jin was living a double life. By day, he was the ruthless head of the Ko family, making decisions that had life or death consequences, navigating the treacherous waters of his criminal enterprise. But at night, with Clara, he was just Jin. He shed his power like a heavy coat at her door, desperate for the few hours of peace only she could give him. He knew it couldn't last. The two worlds were on a collision course. He was falling in love with her, a feeling so powerful it terrified him more than any rival gang or police investigation. Love was a vulnerability, a weakness he couldn't afford, yet he couldn't let her go. He was a drowning man, and she was his only breath of air. Min-jun saw the change in him. "You are distracted, Hyung-nim," he warned one day after Jin had let a minor infraction from a subordinate slide. "This woman, she is making you soft. She is making me human," Jin had corrected, his voice sharp. But he knew Min-jun was right. His focus was divided, and in his world, a lack of focus was a death sentence. The collision came sooner than he expected. It was his father's doing. His father, who had been watching from the sidelines with growing disapproval, saw Clara as a threat to the family's stability. He saw the humanity she brought out in Jin as a weakness to be exploited or excised. He arranged a charity gala at one of the family's hotels, a high-profile event to celebrate the St. Jude's cardiac wing. He made a personal public donation in Clara's name, forcing her attendance. It was a power play, a way to draw her into their world and show her exactly what it entailed. Clara was cornered. To refuse would be a public insult to the hospital's biggest benefactor. She agreed, her stomach twisting in knots. She wore a simple, elegant blue dress she'd bought at a consignment shop. When Jin saw her walk into the ballroom, his breath caught in his throat. She was so out of place among the glittering, predatory sharks of his world, and yet she shone brighter than any of them. He felt a fierce, primal urge to spirit her away, to hide her from the darkness he knew was coming, but he was trapped, obligated to play the part of the gracious host, the dutiful son. He watched from across the room as his father cornered her. He saw the false smile, the offer of the drink, and he heard the whisper that saved her. After she walked away, his father turned to him, his eyes cold with fury. "That one has spirit," the old man sneered. "A problem. You need to handle it." "I will," Jin said, his voice a low growl. But he didn't mean it the way his father thought. He found her near a service exit, trying to compose herself. "Clara," he said, his voice gentle. She spun around, her eyes wide with a fear she could no longer hide. "I can't do this, Jin. This world, your family, it's not right." Before he could answer, the world exploded. The sound of gunfire echoed from the front of the ballroom, followed by screams. It was the Tong, a brazen, direct assault, a message sent in blood. Jin's training took over. He grabbed Clara, pulling her behind him, his body becoming a shield. "Min-jun!" he roared, and his men materialized from the crowd, guns drawn, forming a protective circle. The gala guests were screaming, scrambling, a chaotic tide of panic. He shoved Clara toward the service exit. "Go!" he commanded. "Get out of here!" But she was frozen, staring at the gun that had appeared in his hand as if from nowhere. She looked from the weapon to his face, and for the first time she saw him. Not the gentle lover, not the wealthy enigma. She saw the kingpin, a man at home with violence, a man who commanded death. The illusion shattered, and the reality was terrifying. "Jin," she whispered, her voice trembling. There was no time for lies, no time for anything but the brutal, ugly truth. "My family does not just own hotels, Clara," he said, his voice harsh, his eyes never leaving the chaos in the main room. "This is my life. This is who I am." It was the confession, the moment he had dreaded. He saw the understanding dawn in her eyes, followed by a wave of horror and revulsion. He saw her heart break, and it broke his in return. Minjun grabbed his arm. "Hyungnim, we have to move." Jin looked at Clara one last time, his face a mask of anguish. "Go," he said again, his voice cracking. "Run!" And she did. She ran out the door and out of his life, leaving him alone in the darkness he had tried so hard to keep her from. The painful goodbye didn't happen in a flurry of tears and angry words. It was silent. A week after the gala, after the news reports had faded and the city had moved on, Clara packed a small bag. She left the white orchid Jin had given her, now wilted, on the kitchen counter. She didn't write a note. There was nothing to say. He was a crime lord, a mafia boss. The beautiful, dangerous illusion had been stripped away, leaving only an ugly, violent reality she could not accept. She went to her mother's small house in the suburbs, a place she hadn't been in years. Her mother, a woman of stern faith and even sterner judgment, had always disapproved of Clara's life in the big city. When Clara confessed a sanitized version of the story, that she had been involved with a dangerous man and had to leave, her mother's face was a mask of disappointment. "I warned you," her mother Beatrice said, her voice sharp as broken glass. "The city is no place for a good girl. It's full of temptation and sin." Clara didn't argue. She just retreated into herself, the vibrant, resilient woman she had been slowly fading, replaced by a hollow-eyed ghost. She was safe. Physically, she was far from Jin's world, but her heart, her soul, felt like it was still trapped in that ballroom, shattered into a million pieces. She was miserable. The safety she had run to felt like a prison, the quiet of the suburbs a screaming silence that was a constant reminder of what she had lost. Every time the phone rang, her heart leaped with a sickening mix of hope and terror. But he never called. Jin had respected her choice. He had let her go. He hadn't sent his men to find her, hadn't tried to contact her. It was the most painful, profound act of love he had ever committed. Letting her run from him was the only way to keep her safe. His world descended into a colder, darker version of what it had been before. Without Clara, the emptiness he had always felt returned with a vengeance, a gnawing, gaping wound in the center of his chest. He threw himself into the war with the tong. He was ruthless, brilliant, and utterly merciless. He dismantled their operations with a brutal efficiency that scared even his own men. His father was delighted. "I knew you had it in you, son," the old man said, clapping him on the back after a particularly bloody victory. "You've finally shed that weakness. You are a true Ko now." The words made Jin feel sick. He looked at his empire, at the fear in the eyes of his enemies and the cold respect in the eyes of his men, and he felt nothing but disgust. He had won the war, but he had lost everything that mattered. He was the king of an empire of ashes. Minjun watched the transformation with a heavy heart. The boss he respected was gone, replaced by this cold automaton. One night, as Jin stared out at the city from his penthouse, a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand, Minjun dared to speak. "This is not who you are, Hyungnim." "It's who I have to be." Jin replied, his voice devoid of life. For what? Minjun pressed. For a legacy you never wanted? For a father who sees you as a weapon? She is gone. This will not bring her back. I know, Jin whispered. The admission was a crack in his icy facade. I know. He was haunted by her, by the memory of her laughter in his sterile apartment, the scent of her skin on his pillows, the way her eyes would crinkle at the corners when she smiled. He would find himself driving past her old apartment building, past the hospital, torturing himself with the ghost of her presence. The misery of separation was a constant physical ache. He was incomplete. He thought of her whisper in the ballroom. Don't drink that. A moment of self-preservation, a refusal to be a victim. She was a woman of principle, of strength, and he had tried to pull her into a world that would have destroyed that. That night, something inside him shifted. Minjun's words, his father's praise, the endless, hollow victories, it all coalesced into a single, blinding moment of clarity. He could not have her and have this life. The two were mutually exclusive. He had to choose. And for the first time since inheriting his father's crown, Jinko knew exactly what he wanted. It wasn't power. It wasn't wealth. It wasn't fear. It was her. The next day, he called a meeting with the family's top lieutenants. He walked into the boardroom, the air thick with smoke and testosterone, and dropped a bombshell. As of today, he announced, his voice ringing with an authority no one dared question, we are going legitimate. The room fell silent, stunned silence. Then a few nervous chuckles. They thought he was joking. He wasn't. All revenue streams that are not 100% legal will be terminated within the month, he continued, his eyes scanning the faces of the men who had served his family for decades. The protection rackets, the gambling, the imports from Macau, all of it, gone. His father, who sat at the head of the table like a retired monarch, rose to his feet, his face purple with rage. Have you lost your mind? You will destroy everything I built. What you built, Jin said, his voice dangerously quiet as he turned to face his father, was a prison, for me, for all of us. I am tearing it down. It was a declaration of war against his own past, the grand gesture of change. It was a long, bloody, and dangerous process. Cutting off the illegal businesses meant making enemies of men who had once been allies. It meant paying off rivals, absorbing losses that would have bankrupted lesser organizations, and staring down the barrels of guns from men who felt betrayed. He had to fight a war on two fronts, against the criminal underworld that refused to let him leave, and against the old guard within his own family, led by his furious father, who saw his move toward legitimacy as the ultimate betrayal. Jin moved with surgical precision. He used the family's immense wealth to buy silence and cooperation. He sold off assets, closed down operations, and funneled everything into their legitimate enterprises. He worked with lawyers and consultants, restructuring the entire KO empire from the ground up. He was dismantling his father's legacy, piece by painful piece, and rebuilding it into something new, something clean, something a woman like Clara could be a part of. It took a year, a long, brutal year. He got another scar, a thin white line on his jaw, a reminder of a close call in a parking garage. Minjun stood by him, a loyal soldier following his king into the most dangerous battle of their lives. Many of the old guard left, disgusted, but new people came in. People with business degrees instead of prison records. The culture of the organization slowly, painstakingly began to change. Through it all, the thought of Clara was his guiding star, his reason, his hope. He didn't know where she was, but he knew he couldn't go to her until it was done. He had to become a man worthy of her, a man who could offer her a future, not just a gilded cage. 1 year to the day after the gala, the final piece was in place. The last of the illicit businesses had been sold or shuttered. The Co-Group was now a legitimate, if still intimidating, global corporation. Jin stood in his penthouse, the same view before him, but he was a different man. The emptiness was still there, but now it was filled with a purpose, a desperate, terrifying hope. He turned to Minjun. "Find her," he said. It didn't take Minjun long. Clara had returned to the city 2 months prior. The quiet of the suburbs had nearly driven her mad. She couldn't stay away from the energy, the life, the place where she felt she belonged, even if it held painful memories. She was working at a different hospital, living in a new apartment, trying to rebuild her life. But it was a life in grayscale. The vibrant colors had been drained from it the day she ran from Jin. Maya, ever her friend, saw the sadness that never quite left her eyes. "You miss him," Maya said one night. It wasn't a question. "I miss who I thought he was," Clara corrected, but her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe," Maya said gently. "That was a part of who he really is." Clara was walking home from a late shift, the familiar ache in her feet a comforting rhythm. The street was quiet, the air cool. She was so lost in her thoughts that she didn't notice the man standing in the shadows of her new apartment building until she was almost upon him. Her heart seized with fear. She fumbled for her keys, her hand shaking. "Clara." She knew that voice. She would know it in her sleep, in her dreams, in her nightmares. She looked up. It was Jin. He wasn't in a suit. He was dressed simply, in jeans and a dark jacket. He looked thinner, tired. There was a new scar on his jaw. He didn't have a car. He wasn't flanked by bodyguards. He was just a man, standing on a sidewalk, looking at her with a raw hunger and a desperate hope that stole the air from her lungs. "Jin," she breathed. "I'm not here to scare you," he said quickly, holding up his hands as if to show they were empty. I had to see you." She stood frozen, a whirlwind of emotions, fear, anger, longing, love, raging inside her. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice trembling. "To tell you that I changed," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Everything. It's gone. The business, the violence, all of it. It's gone. I spent a year tearing it all down. For you." She stared at him, wanting to believe him, terrified to believe him. "I don't understand." "You don't have to," he said, taking a tentative step closer. "Just know that the man you ran from, he doesn't exist anymore. I killed him. I had to, because I couldn't live without you. I tried. For a year, I tried. It was a year in hell." He stopped just a few feet from her. He looked broken and whole, all at once. "I am not asking for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I am just asking for a chance to be the man you deserve." Tears were streaming down Clara's face. She saw the truth in his eyes, the sacrifice, the agonizing journey he had taken to find his way back to her. The walls around her heart, the ones she had so carefully rebuilt, crumbled into dust. She didn't say anything. She just closed the distance between them and launched herself into his arms. The reunion kiss was not gentle. It was desperate. It was hungry. It was a year of pain and loneliness and longing poured into a single, frantic moment. It was the taste of tears and the promise of tomorrow. His arms wrapped around her, holding her so tightly it was as if he was trying to merge their bodies into one, terrified that if he let go, she would disappear again. It was a kiss that signified the end of their separation and the true beginning of their future. A future built not on a dangerous illusion, but on a difficult, hard-won reality. He had changed his world for her, and in his arms, Clara finally felt like she was home. An epilogue of sorts was written in the quiet moments that followed. They built a new life, one where his past was a scar, not an open wound. The Co-Group thrived under his legitimate leadership. He was still a powerful man, but his power was now wielded in boardrooms, not back alleys. His father remained a bitter, distant figure, a ghost of a fallen empire. Min Jun stayed on as his head of security and, more importantly, his friend, a quiet witness to the transformative power of love. Clara never went back to the 12-hour shifts. Jin had wanted to give her the world, but all she wanted was a purpose. She used the vast resources now at her disposal to open a series of free clinics in the city's most underserved neighborhoods, bringing healthcare to those who, like her, had once been drowning in the struggle. She found her strength not in surviving, but in helping others survive. They married in a small, private ceremony, with only Maya and Min Jun as witnesses. There were no ballrooms, no glittering crowds, just the two of them standing together, two halves of a whole, their joined hands a testament to the fact that even in the darkest of worlds, light can find a way in. The path had been fraught with danger and heartbreak, but they had found their way. Together. This story teaches us that love's true power isn't just in acceptance, but in its ability to inspire profound change. It explores the idea that no one is beyond redemption if they are willing to dismantle the parts of their life that cause harm, not for praise, but for the simple, profound reason of becoming worthy of the person they love. It's a journey from darkness to light, proving that the most valuable empires are not built on fear, but on a foundation of trust and sacrifice. We really hope you enjoyed this educational piece of content and hope that you could understand the moral lessons behind it. If you were moved by Jin and Clara's story, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe for more tales of dramatic romance, and share it with someone who believes in the power of a second chance. Now we want to hear from you. In the comments below, tell us, what did you think of the moment Clara whispered, "Don't drink that"? Was it her strength, her intuition, or just pure luck that saved her and ultimately changed both their destinies? And for our next story, who would you like to see find their own unlikely love? Let us know by commenting A for Minjun, the loyal second in command, or B for Maya, the supportive best friend. We can't wait to read your thoughts.